We have all done stupid things in a moment of anger, sadness, or grief. It may be a regretful statement or a foolish action, but it is something we can all relate to at some point in our chaotic lives. All of us will experience anger at numerous points in our time. It is crucial for us to feel the emotions we feel and to let them out when we do. However, it is also vital for us to control those emotions, not to explode and act out in regretful ways. But it is easy to see why so many of us fail to find that balance on certain occasions. There are times that things will happen that we cannot control, and these will trigger something inside of us that we did not know lurked beneath the surface. Some things push certain people too far, taking them that extra step over their edge in one way or another. But what if those actions we took in a heated moment were to take us so far that they would haunt us for all eternity? My name is Luke Mordew, and this urban legend is La Llorona. No matter what nation we're in, we all have our own boogeymen that haunt our children's imaginations. Many cultures use scary stories as an age-old method to keep them in check, intentionally inducing fear amongst their unruly ways. The name is bogeyman amongst the shores of Britain. In North America, its name is the ever so slightly different boogeyman. Although, perhaps due to the films, I've always used the American pronunciation. As mentioned in a previous chapter, Slender Man temporarily took up the mantle of boogeyman for a generation, remaining as mysterious and otherworldly as any boogeyman before it. But in some countries, the being that takes this mantle is no mysterious figure. In some cultures, there is not only a backstory, but a purpose, a goal, a tragedy, and a fear that any shadowy figure cannot match. In Mexico, the boogeyman is the vengeful spirit of a woman desperately seeking her lost children, weeping into the night, wailing into the darkness, and would eventually be given the name of La Llorona. In my telling of a fictionalized time where La Llorona was witnessed, we will follow young Veronica and her cousin Diego on a hot summer evening on the streets of Mexico. It had been years since Veronica's parents had moved from Mexico to the United States of America in the hopes of creating a good life for their young daughter. They lived in a typical home, making good money at the jobs they worked to ensure that they could follow the so-called American dream. Their daughter's schooling was nothing special, but it wasn't bad either, and Veronica was above average in most classes for a while. The changes that they had fought for and their sacrifices they made seemed to be paying off. That was, at least until Veronica turned 13. They knew this wasn't the case, although it seemed almost as if she had changed overnight, now seeing herself as an adult instead of a child in her teenage years. Her attitude towards them, to life, school, and more seemed to take a complete U-turn. There was a new group of girls she'd begun to hang around with from school, and these were who her father blamed for the changes. On the other hand, her mother saw it as one of many factors, noticing the transition was far deeper than what they could influence. By the end of the school year, they weren't sure what to do with her. Her school attendance had gotten worse, and her detentions had grown more consistent. They knew that something had to change before returning from the summer break. This, something has to be done, became, it's time to do something, the night her father found his young daughter drunk in a field a few blocks from the house one Saturday night. It was by the following Wednesday that Veronica was arriving at the front door of her Uncle Hector's home down in Mexico. He was her father's oldest brother, the strictest, scariest, and firmest of all of his siblings. He had agreed to take her on for the summer, giving her chores to do and keeping her in line with a few life lessons. At first, she fought back, trying her luck as much as she could against the uncle she barely knew. But quickly she realized that she would need to play ball to have the remnants of a happy life here. It wasn't all bad. Her cousin Diego was nearly the same age as her, and her uncle could be funny when she behaved. And so, she began to do so more often. As a reward for being so good for the last few days, and in an attempt to make her feel more at home with her extended family, Uncle Hector had sent her and Diego out to the shops to get some snacks. For tonight, they were going to sit and watch a movie. They had gone and picked up some items, some that Veronica recognized and some that she had never heard of before in her life, trusting Diego to decide on what was good and within budget. Once they had paid and bagged up their goodies, they began to venture back home, ready for an evening of relaxing as a family as they followed the roads ahead, filled with twists and turns at every corner. Veronica looked up at the darkening sky as the sun was beginning to set. She could hear music and car horns consistently blaring from what seemed to be every corner in the distance. She felt as if her clothes were constantly sticky, her eyes permanently heavy in the warmth of this hot country. "Jesus, it's hot. I don't know how you manage it," she complained. Diego sniggered under his breath, replying, "You get used to it." "Yeah? When?" She smiled. "I've been here over a week and I'm as sticky as I was the day I got here." Diego laughed. She wasn't sure why, but he always seemed to find her complaints amusing, as if she was the funniest person he knew. She didn't mind this. In fact, it was nice for her to bring a smile to someone's face, as for so long, she had brought nothing but trouble to her parents. She looked across the road and watched two men as they strolled down the street together in deep conversation, whilst one kicked every puddle he passed like a toddler. It had rained all day, only stopping about half an hour earlier, just in time for them to go to the shops. And this had surprised her a great deal. She knew realistically that rain fell in Mexico, yet she had never seen it happen in the film and TV shows she would watch. Rain was simply not something associated with the country by any stretch of the imagination. That was one thing she loved about this place, the surprises it brought. Each building, smell, and sound brought its unique perspective to her senses, things she had never witnessed before as she darted her eyes around the street to take it all in. But during this admiration, Veronica noticed something that seemed out of place even in this exciting part of the world. As they walked past one of the long alleyways to their left, shadowed by the buildings around it in the sunset, she could have sworn she had just seen a woman standing by herself, wearing a long white dress, crying in the darkness. She stopped, stepping back to the alley that she had just passed to get a better look. But to her surprise, the woman was gone. She was confused. Why was she there dressed that way? Why was she crying? What happened to her? Where had she gone? Diego stepped back, looking down into the shadow of the alley, before asking her what it was she was doing. "I swear I just saw a woman crying," she replied. He turned to look down the alley again, hearing nothing but the sounds of streaming water in the distance, remnants left behind from the downpour earlier that day. "I can't hear anything," he began to say, but Veronica cut him up to abruptly state, "She was there, I swear it. She looked really upset." He laughed and shook his head, enjoying her humor once again as he said, "Stop messing with me, let's go home." But before he could turn to walk away, they both froze, as the sounds of the crying woman began to echo from the shadows beside them. Veronica turned back to the alley again, calling out, "See, I told you, we should go check that she's okay." But as she turned to Diego, she noticed his eyes had widened and his face had grown pale, already stepping back away from the shadow of the alley and into the soft orange glow of the setting sun, ever so slightly shaking his head. "We should go," he whispered. "Why?" she asked. "Just trust me, Veronica. You don't know about La Llorona." Veronica tutted in frustration as she turned away from him, stepping further into the shadow of the alleyway, exclaiming, "I'm not from Mexico, but I am Mexican, Diego. I know who La Llorona is." She felt somewhat patronized and defensive over his assumption that she wouldn't know such a large part of their culture's folklore. In an instant, she could feel herself getting defensive, growing defiant and agitated as she continued down the alley. She made it only 2 steps before Diego lunged forward, grabbing her arm to stop her. "Veronica, don't!" he pleaded. Although she read this as more of a demand and pulled away from him with force, snapping back, "It's a story, Diego. We're not little kids anymore. Someone's upset and I'm going to go make sure she's okay." She turned once more, stepping further into the shadow as Diego stepped back into the light of the road once again, watching her as a wave of anxiety covered his heart and soul. The ground ahead of her was uneven, the walls were peeling away, and rubbish was scattered across the floor with the trash cans filled to the brim. The atmosphere here was strange, feeling notably colder than the road behind her, with a peculiar dampness in the air. She stopped, finally delving deep enough for her liking. She looked down at the stream-like puddle that laid out ahead of her. It had been created by the pouring rainwater falling from the above building, making a stream into the darkness ahead. The cries were faint, but consistent as she grew closer. She noticed a slight whisper emitting itself amongst the tears, as if the weeping woman was also speaking, ever so faintly to herself, somewhere in the shadow. Veronica could speak some Spanish, but still could not make out what was being said. It was too quiet and hidden under too many cries that had begun to grow, evolving into wails as the woman's desperate pleas echoed around Veronica. The sound waves bouncing from wall to wall. She looked ahead but could see no signs of life. She turned back to where she had just come from, checking by the trash cans to see if she had accidentally passed her. But there was nobody. She could hear her, and yet she could not see her. It was all getting too strange now. So Veronica decided to give it one last go by asking, "Is everything okay?" But the moment she asked this simple, caring question, the wailing stopped, dropping her with nothing but the sounds of water, mixed in with the distant, muffled sounds of cars and music. She had grown fearful of her situation, admitting that perhaps Diego was right, and that she shouldn't have followed the weeping woman's cries. She looked down at the water ahead of her, understanding that it should be less than an inch deep. Nothing but a temporary stream strolling downhill from the previous rainfall. But it didn't look that way. Instead, it looked thick, dark, and deep, as if she could dive inside and swim. This was one unnerving thought too many, as she turned around once more to see Diego standing by in the warmth of the sunset at the end of the alley. His hands clenched together into fists as he anxiously watched on, gripping the bag of snacks in his now pale hands. He had watched her every step, his eyes watering as the goosebumps erupted over his body. He'd stood there and watched as she turned back to him, feeling relieved that she was finally coming back. But that relief was short-lived as the breath left his body. Behind Veronica, rising from the shallow water, was the head of La Llorona. His body tensed as he slammed the bag of snacks to the floor. He screamed at the top of his lungs for her to run. But it was too late. La Llorona was now standing behind the troubled young girl. And before Diego could react, move, or say another word, she had reached out, grabbed Veronica by the neck, and dragged her back, pulling her down into a watery grave. Diego screamed again, darting forward as fast as he could, knowing he couldn't fight off the curse of La Llorona, but filled with the instinct to try and save his cousin. He quickly arrived at the stream and jumped inside to chase them. But to his dismay, All he did was create a splash as his trainer hit the shallow puddle beneath his feet. He paced around, screaming her name, desperate for any sign of her response. But all that came was his own voice bouncing off the walls and back at him. His cousin was gone, dragged into the darkness by the weeping woman, never to be seen again. He didn't know what to do or say when he got home. How would he explain her disappearance? As he pondered, standing amongst the shallow stream, he heard the weeping woman's cries again. She had realized that Veronica was not her child, and she had returned. Diego was not going to make the same mistake that his cousin had, as he instantly turned, darting up the alleyway and into the safety of the street, where he would continue to run, crying and wailing, just as she had done before him, screaming, "She is real. She is here." Many years ago in Mexico, or so the story goes, there lived a beautiful young woman named Maria, and although her beauty was evident for all to see, she was a poor woman from a poor family. Even so, she had caught the eye of a Spanish nobleman. The two were from very different worlds, not only because he was rich whilst she was not, but also because his people had colonized her people's land. The Spanish were hated by many, and she knew in her heart that she should have hated him also, although she could not help but fall in love with his charms. Soon enough, she was living in a large house with a river rushing by. The Spanish nobleman was often away but would regularly visit. Her life had improved, she was wealthy and in love, now with 2 children she bore with the Spanish nobleman. As the fairy tales of this kind often go, it would seem this would be the happy ending of the story. Although it was not long before Maria had begun to notice that the nobleman's attentions were drifting further away from her. Over time, the nobleman's arrival seemed to grow more and more sparse, only feeding into Maria's anxieties, until the day that they eventually engulfed her. She was walking down a pathway near the river with her children when a carriage approached them. It eventually slowed and stopped as the nobleman addressed the children from inside. Maria watched through her heartbroken tears as the man she loved ignored her completely, now sitting beside a younger, elegant, beautiful Spanish woman, more suited to his place in society. She was his new bride. The carriage continued and they left, not once acknowledging her existence, leaving her for good with her 2 children. In a fit of rage, heartbreak, pain, horror, and disgust, Maria dragged her 2 children away from the path and into the river beside them. And it is here that she would drown them under the flowing water that covered their little faces, before taking her own life. Once Maria had arrived at the gates of heaven, she found herself unable to enter. She would soon learn that her children's souls were now lost, and until she could find them, she would not be allowed any peace. And so, she came back to earth, where she walks amongst us as a spirit, weeping and wailing, searching for her lost children, taking any that she can find, perhaps even yours. The tales of Maria vary, but the points remain almost consistently the same. In other tellings of the tale, Maria would spend her days as a peasant in her poor surroundings, whilst her nights were spent in a beautiful white gown that she would use to entice and thrill the men who admired her. In this variation, she already had 2 children at home, making it difficult for her to spend the evenings reveling in the attention she had grown so fond of. Often, she would leave them alone whilst she was out with the gentlemen of the area. Until one day, her 2 sons were found drowned in the river by her home. Some would claim that the drowning had occurred due to her neglectful and covetous ways. Others would say that she had drowned them to make life easier. Either way, she was once again the cause of her children's demise. Most variations tell the story of the nobleman and the heartbreak Maria had felt. However, how the murders occurred is known to change ever so slightly, perhaps to soften the blow of the murderer's intentions, allowing us to sympathize with her pain a little bit more. In variations such as this, when the nobleman and his new love leave Maria and her children on the pathway, she drags them to the river and throws them inside. Only now, she instantly realizes what temporary insanity had taken hold of her, as she heads into the current of the water to retrieve them in a horrified panic. But it's too late. The children are swept away by the strong current around her, disappearing into the water forever. She mourns her loss day and night, donning her white gown as she wanders up and down the river, hoping to find her children so that they can reunite again. And during this time, she refuses to eat or drink, dedicating her entire existence to finding her lost children. She grows thin and pale, whilst her gown turns soggy and soiled, until the day that it finally catches up with her. Maria would die by the river's water, still searching for her children until her final breath. But death was not enough to stop this mother's heartbreak and grief. And shortly after, townsfolk began to witness her spirit as it still walks up and down the river, searching for her children. Her weeping and wailing became a curse amongst the townspeople, and eventually they grow fearful of going out after dark. Many sightings occur of her white gown floating above the ground or water as she continues to cry, searching for her lost children. Soon, she is forgotten as Maria and known as La Llorona, translating as the Weeping Woman. Children to this day are warned not to go out into the dark and told to behave when they are required to, because if they do not, they may just attract the spirit of La Llorona, who will take them away and drown them in a watery grave. Her cruelty varies depending on the tale you are hearing and by whom is telling the story. Some say we are all in danger, from her rage expanding from children to women and men. Others say that only children need to worry, turning her story into that of a boogeyman amongst the Mexican people. She has become a warning to many over the years. Not only a boogeyman for the children, but a warning to straying fathers and neglectful mothers. Her legend was seemingly first documented around the 1550 mark in the Florentine Codex, an encyclopedic work of the Nahua people of Mexico, titled The General History of Things of New Spain, written in the 16th century by Franciscan friar Bernardino de Sahagún. Here, she seems to reveal herself to be several pre-Hispanic Mexican goddesses blending as one, with two notable Aztec goddesses making their presence known. To some, her story is thought to be one of 10 omens that foretold the conquest of Mexico, which leads us to the first of these Aztec gods, Ciacoltl, known as the Snake Woman, described as the omen of war. She was known for being a savage beast and an evil omen. She would adorn white and walk in the shadows of the night, weeping and wailing. This goddess is thought to also connect to the sixth of the 10 omens in the Florentine Codex. She was believed to be foretelling the conquest of Mexico, a manifestation of a woman wailing into the night about the fate of her children. Later, a new codex would be written by the Dominican friar Diego Duran, who detailed the origins of the Aztec gods. Here, he talks of the goddess Coatlicue, who seems to be often linked to or even thought to be the same as Ciacotl. She was the mother of Huitzilopochtli, the god of war, and was known as the ugliest and dirtiest. She said she would wait for her son to return to her from war, weeping and moaning for him whilst he was gone. Scholars and historians have found links between La Llorona and several goddesses, those of childbirth, war, and those who collect the souls of the dead. She is known by many names, reportedly following many paths, both savior and enemy, nurturer and destroyer. Her story has become solidified in the zeitgeist of Mexico's culture. It now spreads further around the world as each country interconnects that little bit more each year. Although she is not the only story of her kind, and tales of women in white are familiar. The ancient Greeks had a tale that is notably similar as the story of Medea, the woman who killed her children as revenge against her lover who had abandoned them. The ancient Greeks also had the tale of the demigoddess Lamia, in which Hera, Zeus's wife, learned of an affair between Lamia and Zeus, killing all of their children. In her anger, Lamia decides to kill other women's children in return. The stories are different, yet similar enough to find comparisons. Not to mention the hundreds of tales of ghostly women draped in white who haunt the halls across various ancient buildings around the world. These women in white are so common that the term itself, white lady, is known amongst several cultures as the title of a ghostly presence. A slight Google search will bring up lists from around the world that show each country's very own white lady. In England, where I'm from, it feels as though there is a white lady in every castle I visit, almost always connected to a theme of loss, or more notably, a betrayal by a lover. Another similarity to other cultures' legends is found in the tale of the Banshee, a creature from Irish folklore that is most definitely worth noting. A banshee is a female spirit who heralds the death of a family member, usually with the act of wailing, shrieking, or keening. There is no denying that the tale of La Llorona is, at its heart, a Mexican urban legend. Although there does seem to be evidence that this tale may have been influenced, or at the very least, slightly morphed by several cultures. Camilla Townsend presented evidence deconstructed by indigenous sources, particularly the Florentine Codex, on how the post-conquest elite combined Christian and indigenous ideas to explain the conquest. She asserts that it is inevitable that beliefs and tales mixed and merged, forming the idea that perhaps La Llorona was a combination of both indigenous and European legends, taking the white lady overseas to the new land. Although, with this legend, there is no definitive answer to where it originated, or what its underlying meaning, if anything, even is. The weeping woman remains a divisive character. To most, she's the boogeyman. To some, she is a banshee-like figure. To others, she is a traitor to her people. She is a victim and a monster, a mother and a murderer, a beauty queen and a fright. The layers of her story and the variations in their purpose are why spirits have remained walking the streets of Mexico for many years, morphing and changing as urban legends usually do, becoming so many different things to so many different people. If you're still with me,
then I know you share the same passion for folklore and urban legends that drives this show. But to keep bringing you these stories, I need your help. Every season comes to life with the incredible support of listeners like you on Patreon. For just £3 a month, less than the price of a small coffee, you can help ensure that this show continues to thrive, with shorter breaks between seasons and even more content available. But that's not all. As a Patreon subscriber, you'll unlock exclusive perks like access to our bonus series, Modern Myths, where we dive into lesser-known but equally captivating tales like the Hodag, Black-Eyed Children, the Dark Watchers, and many more. You'll gain instant access to our entire library of bonus content the moment you join, with new chapters coming each season. You'll also get a behind-the-scenes look at how the show is made, discounts on merchandise, and an invitation to our private group chat, where you can connect with me directly and share your love for urban legends with a community of like-minded enthusiasts. Plus, as a special treat, I randomly select patrons to feature in upcoming stories, so you might find yourself becoming part of the very legends we explore. Supporting us on Patreon isn't just about subscribing. It's about joining a team dedicated to preserving and expanding on our collection of folklore. Your contribution directly fuels the research, production, and growth of the show, helping us continue this incredible journey together. So, if you're ready to take the next step and become an integral part of the Urban Legends community, head over to our Patreon page via the link in our show notes and choose the paid subscription. I'm looking forward to seeing you there, where we can keep these tales alive. And now, back to the legend.
To understand La Llorona's importance in the world, it is first essential to understand her tale. Due to the oral history of her story from mouth to mouth, the changes have been inevitable and constant, evolving to different conclusions within different households, towns, and cities. And although much of her tale remains consistent across the board, her spirit's agenda, purpose, and intentions vary. This, in turn, allows her to become a spirit that transcends time, cultures, and countries. The roots of La Llorona may appear to be pre-Hispanic, but the earliest published reference to the legend is that of a 19th century sonnet by the Mexican poet Manuel Carpio. The poem itself bears no mention of a woman murdering her children, instead referring to her as Rosalia, a woman her husband murdered. La Llorona has roots far beyond the world of legends, with signs of her roots amongst the people of Latin America between the 5th to 19th centuries, when just under 2 million Spanish people immigrated to the land. At first, it seemed that marriage between indigenous women and Spanish men was relatively common and widely accepted. But things changed with the arrival of more Spanish women. Being Spanish-born made these new women far more desirable as wives and mothers, causing a rise in their status. Inevitably, this, of course, dropped the status of the indigenous women, with Spanish men deciding to leave them for younger Spanish women, with reports claiming that the children were, on occasion, also taken away from the indigenous woman under the notion that they were not capable of adequately socializing them. It is not hard to see how the story of La Llorona may have formed, perhaps even layering itself over the tales of women in white that would have brought themselves to the shores of Mexico from the invading lands of Europe. There is a connection between legend and history when it comes to the story of La Malinche, a Nahua woman who served as a translator and concubine for Hernan Cortes, the Spanish man who led the expedition that caused the fall of the Aztec Empire. She would give birth to a son, and eventually would be considered both the mother of modern Mexico and a traitor against her people for aiding the Spanish, becoming as controversial and vague as the legend of the Weeping Woman itself. although her story may not be as black and white as those titles may suggest her to be. She was an indigenous woman enslaved and sold to Cortez, where she would be raped and seemingly forced to stand by his side. Her will to stay alive kept her going through the brutal conditions that she was dealt, doing what she must to survive. To many in history, she would become and remain the betrayer of her people, and her tale would be told in parallel to Eve and the original sin. Her demonization led to her placement as a seductress, giving up her people to the invaders in return for fortune. To some, the tale of her spirit roaming the streets and wailing for her children is not meant to be taken literally, but is more metaphorical. This theory places La Malinche as La Llorona, weeping over the loss of the indigenous people, known in this tale as her children. That said, this is not the only place where the tales of La Malinche and La Llorona run parallel to each other, as although she may have borne Cortez's son, he too went on to marry a Spanish woman instead. In most tellings of La Llorona's story, her spite causes her to murder her children in a red rage of jealousy, rejection, and hysteria. Although, as time went on, many Mexican women began to retell the story, morphing its agenda to that of a woman creating spirits to curse men. In these tales, it was not necessarily the children she was hunting, but adulterous husbands. The tale ventured from the eerie whispers around the campfire to the written word, eventually evolving into songs before blending into the narratives of plays that would eventually morph into tales on a silver screen. She is often used as a metaphor to look back on the conquest of the colonial period, with this happening in plays as far back as 1959. Storytellers have begun to reshape her story again, now with more purpose than the boogeyman she had been cast as before. In 2019, the Conjuring franchise made a film based on the darker elements of the urban legend, calling it The Curse of La Llorona. Although, seemingly without a hint of irony, the Mexicans in the film were placed as side characters, ensuring that the leads were white and American. Perhaps inadvertently proving just how relevant this new, metaphorical version of the tale still is.
Urban Legends is researched, written and produced by Luke Mordew. Original score by Billy Jupp, with additional sounds from storyblocks.com. If you like what you heard and want to hear more, click subscribe on your chosen podcast provider and delve into the mysteries of our previous and future chapters. To find more, including merchandise, video content, images, and more, visit urbanlegendsfolklore.com. If you have more information or a correction on something mentioned in this chapter, please get in touch through our website. We aim to ensure that all information provided is accurate and up to date, and this remains a top priority. If you want to support the show, receive early access, and have more of a say in what we do, then become a patron by clicking the link in our show notes. For these chapters in video format, simply search Urban Legends Folklore on YouTube. Follow us on TikTok, Instagram, and Threads, and join our Facebook group by searching Urban Legends Folklore.